Hi, I'm Katrina McLaren, and this is my podcast, The Last Resort. In this series, I'll be talking about our journey and the restoration of Casa Nova House, a stately heritage-listed mansion built in 1861, located in the small town of Oamaru in the South Island of New Zealand. This is a story of how we changed our entire lives, trusted our gut, and took a leap of faith to live our dream. Welcome back to the Last Resort podcast with your host, Katrina McLaren. Today, we're very lucky to be joined by our lovely neighbour, Heather Macham, formerly Graham. Heather has a personal involvement with Casa Nova House. Not only did she reside here in the late 1960s, but her parents actually purchased Casa Nova House in 1966 and saved it from being demolished. At that time, it was completely derelict and the sheep were running through it. Heather, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you, Katrina.
We're so happy to have you here. We've done a few episodes now and people are, I think, now very familiar with myself and Brenda's journey. But what I wanted to talk about was when your parents first, how did it even come about? You just told me that you as a family were living in Tayward Street, which is just around the corner from Casa Nova House. You must have been aware that there was this big giant mansion sort of sitting there, or how did it come up in your radar?
Absolutely. The big giant mansion was the playground for all the kids in the North End. It was. Everybody that lived in the district or in the region would come over into the haunted house, break in one way or another, run up and down, vandals broke windows. We jumped out of the windows onto the shrubbery. We got on the roof. It was a great place to play.
I'm surprised there wasn't a few broken bones from jumping.
There were broken bones. There was a big rope up the hill off a big tree limb, and we used to swing out on it. Somebody let go, broke his leg, and his father came up and removed the rope, and it took about 2 weeks for the next one to be found and put back up again.
So how did it get a reputation as a ghost house?
It's an old derelict house, it just got a reputation. I don't think there's any spooks here. I personally, I've lived in this house. I don't feel any kind of...
I certainly don't feel any bad energy.
Never. No, warmth is the main...
If anything, I think it might be your mum, actually, that's still in the house.
Well, she'd be approving of you and Brenda,
thank you. So you used to play in the house and it was kind of, sort of just sitting there. And
it was getting more and more derelict. Somebody leased the land to run his sheep, and in order to stop having to come and renew their water, he just left a tap going into a big tub that overflowed, and over time the lath and plaster construction of the inside of Casa Nova sucked all that water up, and the water was almost up into the second story, and so the house was starting to rot.
Wow.
When my parents found it. It was literally nick of time when they got it. Yeah, and so that began our long journey here.
Well, I understand that your mother had found out that it was going to be demolished.
Exactly. Now, Mum had a bit of heritage. She liked old houses, and she liked looking after old houses, and she knew about nice things, and she thought Casa Nova was worth saving, and she managed to talk my dad into it. I'm not quite sure how she did that. She's a very persuasive, energetic woman, and my parents were devoted to each other, and Dad would do anything for Mum, including take on Casa Nova, and we all pitched in. It was a full-on family affair.
So do you think that she bought it in mind to turn it into a business or a family home, or what was the plan?
Absolutely not. She just wanted to rescue it and live here. And the business part was just in order to obtain the funds, to obtain the money in order to restore it and to live here.
Right.
So my mother was not a caterer. She was a dressmaker, a tailor by trade, and she really wasn't a very enthusiastic cook. So I'm the cook in the family. Well, and so it was just a means towards an end to get in the house. The catering
she must have been very persuasive. If they went to the bank, they got the loans for it, they got the funding.
They did. Not much funding. Most of the work was done by us as a family, my late father and my elder brother Stuart.
Tell me your dad, though. What was his background?
My dad, both my parents were born in Naseby, and we all came from Ranfurly originally and moved to Oamaru in the early 60s. My father was a mechanic. He fixed farm machinery. That was his special area. This was a big cropping area, and so he was very good with balers. He could fix the knotters on balers, and so he worked very hard doing that.
Everything you've ever said about your father that we've talked about, he was a very clever man.
Oh, very clever,
Is it
very practical.
Very practical. He could turn his hand to anything.
Yeah, he could make anything. He did metal work and woodwork and any kind of work. He was a very clever guy.
So it sounds like it was a combination of your mother's brains and your poor dad's hard work.
Absolutely. They were a power couple.
A power couple. That's the perfect kind.
Yeah.
Someone's got to have the genius ideas. I understand that your mum then, obviously found out that it was going to be demolished.
Yes.
She then goes to the bank with your dad. They get the money and they secure Casa Nova.
They do.
And you're living in Tayward Street at this point. Was the house livable at the time when you bought it?
No
when
way.
they bought it?
No, it was wet. The house was wet and starting to decay. I don't even think the electricity was on at that point. No, I don't think the electricity was even on. And the first task was to remove the wet lath and plaster. Mm-hmm. And that was enormous. We all did it. I mean, I remember I was 11 at the time, and I remember, just breaking walls. It was great fun. We got to wreck stuff.
So the Victorian walls were beyond salvaging, I take it.
They were.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they left it for quite a long time to see if it would dry out, but then it wasn't tenable. And remember, my parents had limited funds. Mm-hmm. We didn't have any heritage money or any big, corporate money, and we had to do everything on the cheap. Pretty much, and so the only way to do it.
Oh, but Heather, I think even in those days there wasn't any regard really given for Victorian.
No, this place was going to be bulldozed.
This was going to be bulldozed.
Yeah.
Anything they did was going to salvage it was always going to be a million steps ahead of nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's no judgment here on that front of things, because it was a time too through the 50s and the 60s where we were starting to remove Victorian because it wasn't considered cool.
No, it wasn't.
Let's put an Art Deco, Art Nouveau, and that was more the theme of where everything was going.
Mum just really did rescue. My parents rescued this house. Yeah, literally. Otherwise, there'd just be a few more, bit more suburbia in this property.
So when they bought it, I understand it wasn't livable, and you're starting to work on it as a family. What were the grounds like? Because at the moment they're quite manicured and they look quite tidy.
And overgrown, huge bushes out of control. There was a fence around it. I think my sister grazed her horse around the house for a while. The main entrance to the house in the old days was off the street on the other side. So that was
off Spruce Street.
Off Spruce Street, the street where I now live.
We still have a second driveway, so it's just by the resource consent that actually guests aren't allowed to use it. It's only for the owners of the property. But we still have two driveways, but our official address is off Old Street.
Old Street, and that was the official address when my parents took over.
Right, was from Old.
Yeah.
So how many siblings do you have? So your parents... Five siblings?
I'm one of five.
One of five.
So I've got an elder sister, very much elder sister, two elder brothers. There's me and then my younger sister.
So your parents basically had a building crew.
Well, they did, although the two eldest ones had left home by then.
Oh, had they?
So basically it was Stuart. Stuart was the man.
He was the man.
He
poor thing.
did so much work. He's a very good, hard-working and lovely brother. Both my brothers are lovely, but Stuart did most of the work at Casa Nova. Every weekend, right, they'd get up, they'd come over here. I'd stay at home in Tayward Street baking morning tea. Then I'd come across with morning tea and then, and they'd have a break. But, I just remember everybody in overalls covered with dust for a very long time.
Oh, I bet. I understand you guys are removing all the plastering and everything like that because it is so wet.
Yeah. Got down to the studs, the bits of wood, the frame of the inside of the house. As you know and have mentioned previously in the blogs, the stone wall was removed in order to make a big enough room to have functions, to have the wedding receptions and 21sts and parties that we had.
So that's in the main dining room downstairs, which today is now the Champion dining room.
Yeah.
So there was an existing, I suppose, dining room / drawing room and a smoker's room, I think you told me.
Yeah.
That room had been divided into two parts.
Well, there was lots of funny little rooms, and I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly how it all was, but there were some small rooms downstairs, but we had to remove the stone up above in the upper story as well because that was, didn't have anything to support it.
Yeah.
And that was fairly hairy, block and tackle, two blokes, one teenager, my brother,
Your
one
poor brother.
dad. Yeah.
And so is that how they removed it?
Yeah, they did.
Literally a piece at a time.
Piece at a time. And then all the slate roof was beyond repair, and that broke my father's heart. He was, the slate was beautiful.
Oh, look, I bet. I mean, it was Irish slate too, from what I've been told.
It had to be replaced with steel, but it just had to, because you couldn't replace it. You couldn't even get slate from China, and there was no money to do that anyway.
No, and I understand from Stuart too, when I spoke to Stuart, that what they did is they literally dug a trench around the house. They literally threw it off and buried it into these big trenches around the property. Ironically, if there's anything planted too close to the house, even now today, if I put a spade in there, I might actually dig up a bit of grey slate.
Yeah,
So
you will.
I've kept a few little pieces that we've come across. So at least it kind of stayed with the house, even though it wasn't salvageable. At least it's been kept here as a part of it.
Yeah.
I also understand that Stuart was on that roof having to paint it.
Everybody spent quite a bit of time on the roof. And in hindsight, it's a shame that we couldn't have conserved more of that slate, because not all of it was ruined. And of course, once you threw it off the roof, it was ruined.
Yeah, but as you say, with funding and everything like that, it's really difficult, and you've got to pick your battles. And the most important battle would have been to make sure the house was watertight.
Exactly.
So I don't think your parents would have had much choice, to be honest.
No.
Putting the corrugated roof was smart. It meant that they could protect it, and the leaks, at least from the roof, stopped. There is up in the roof now in the attic, there is actually still the remnants of the old roof. So that's still up there underneath the current one. So you can still see the old channels and everything that they used to, for how they would drain the water off.
Okay.
And in fact, even around the house, there's still the old sort of Roman-styled stormwater system, well beyond the earthenware, which I think your parents probably put in the 60s. Because if it was derelict before that, they would have had to upgrade all the infrastructure, which I believe they did, from power, sewerage, everything. So it was a massive undertaking.
It was huge.
Do you remember the layout? So downstairs you'd come in, and I understand they removed a wall, but do you remember the rest of the layout for downstairs? Was there a kitchen, bathrooms? Did your parents put the bathrooms in, or was that later?
Yes. My parents put the two downstairs ladies and gents in, and there was also another gents one on the outside. They put in a urinal outside. There was a kitchen, pretty much where the kitchen is now, and where the back of the kitchen was a garage.
Which was later converted into a sort of a storeroom.
Storage.
And I think when the Taylors had it, it was his prep room.
Yeah.
Now it's our laundry and storeroom, but it's still a boiler room. It's still an infrastructural space down there.
Yeah, it was just a garage when we were here.
Yeah. So what about upstairs? So what was upstairs when you came up?
Upstairs, well, we didn't move in until after the house opened as a business, and we left our home in Taylor Street and moved here. And by that time, there was Stuart and my younger sister and I, and my parents lived here. And we lived in a house where the walls weren't lined, and the electricity snaked across the floor, with big sort of caged lights. We just got used to walking around in the dark.
Yeah. And I can imagine it would have been cold, because our first endeavours here, it was very
Well, it was
cold.
Yeah, but we had fires going, we always had the fires going, and we were tough, I guess. And the first room that got finished was my sister's and my bedroom, which is now the Graham suite. So that was the first finished room. And then my parents, they'd put in a little bathroom over at the back of the building.
I think I remember you might have even said to me once that your bedroom now, which is now the Graham chamber, actually you remember it having wood panelling or something in there, or is it?
No, I think we had to rip everything off.
That's what I mean. It was in there, and then you took that off to make it livable again for you guys to sort of sleep in.
Yeah.
So I'm just so that people know that the house was bought in 1966 by your parents. Yeah. They officially opened it to the public as a entertainment venue for a place for people to have social gatherings and 21st and weddings. They had an official ball opening on the 28th of February, 1969. So luckily, Heather's parents actually had salvaged a scrapbook, and in the scrapbook had the news articles and still an invitation of the official opening, which she very kindly donated to us for us to have in the house and for guests to look at. So there was a lot of time that your parents were spending renovating with you and a family. Yeah. And by the time you've moved in, it's now a business. How was it sort of trading? Was it popular? Did people come? Like, what was it like?
It was back in the day where people had big formal 21sts and weddings, and you had to book pretty much years ahead in the other places. So we got all the weddings that were in a bit of a hurry.
The shotgun weddings.
We got the shotgun weddings, and it really, one's social skills developed. I worked as a in the kitchen and as a waitress and a barmaid for my parents, and your social skills developed when you were having to negotiate sort of, warring families. But it was good. It was a very good experience. I learned many things, and our dad was always very, very particular. This was our home, so that you couldn't leave it in a mess. So nobody knocked off until the last ashtray was emptied and the floor was washed and all the bathrooms were done and all the dishes were done and everything was put away. Then you could knock off.
Well, as it should be, to be
Absolutely.
fair. We still operate like that ourselves.
That's a proper way to operate a place.
I think so. And look, and we have that same sort of feeling about it as well, because it's also our home, first and foremost.
Yeah.
The business is definitely secondary, and yes, we need that. We need the income from that.
Yeah.
But
Pretty
it's
much
still
the
our
same
home.
story as my parents. You fell in love with the house and then, we better have a business to make it work.
How are we going to pay for it all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Us and the ever-increasing debt with the ANZ Bank. But I do remember you telling me too that you planted the yew trees that go up the driveway.
Yes,
I think
we
there's
did.
about 10 of them there that by the time we'd bought it had lost their shape and were quite overgrown. But we've been slowly over the last few years getting their shape back together
them back,
and
yeah.
bringing everything back.
Exactly.
What was around here at the time? So was it on an acre roughly when your parents
Yeah.
bought it, like
Yes,
we're seeing now?
It was. It's just what you've got now is what they had, and it
yeah.
was just rough paddock.
Rough paddock.
Rough paddock.
Just so that our listeners know, Heather's also our neighbour, our next door neighbour, and Heather has the last 7 acres behind Casa Nova House, which is actually sort of goes up a hill, but it is grassland as such.
Yeah.
And that and amongst that 7 acres was the original orchard that used to feed the house.
Yeah, that was the original orchard, and the clothes line was up there, and veggie gardens, and the orchard was still there when we were here, but it was very, very, worn out. Nothing. The trees hadn't been looked after. They'd been chewed to bits by horses, and I think the only thing that remained was a cherry and a greengage. And
Oh, really?
There are a couple of pear trees still up the back where there are also walnut trees that still remain. Some of the very first plantings were big nut trees, and I've got a couple of big sacks of walnuts drying on my deck at the moment. Nobody's getting any.
Fair enough. So the possums have lucked out yet again on those.
Yeah.
So we've now, the parents have opened it up and it's turning out to be quite successful for them, which is great.
It was. It paid the bills and it provided a home for, the 3 remaining kids at home until we all grew up and left home. But we all worked here one way or another.
And I understand too that because there was the unfinished wing that remained unfinished through your parents, through the Taylors, and we were the first owners since it was built to finish the actual inside of the house.
Now that was always going to be a project. It was never going to be unfinished, and unfortunately my father had to have early retirement. He had a serious motorcycle accident and had to early retire, and they sold Casa Nova and moved away up to Motueka.
So that's how it came to an end for them.
Yeah,
so how long were they here for roughly, do you think?
Oh, oops.
No, that's okay. But it was a few years.
Oh, many years. Yeah, many years.
Because you always described it to me too, that it really the house that your mother, it was a great love for your mother, this house.
She loved this house, and it's, and I love this house as well. And when you and Brenda bought it and, made it so, restored it to what it should be, it gives me and my family endless pleasure. I mean, I drive home. When I first drove home and saw the lights on upstairs, I had to park up and have a little cry.
Oh, really? That's lovely.
Because it was so good, and now it still gives me joy driving home and seeing the lights on up here.
There is something very magical about this house. There's no doubt about it. The feeling, I've spoken about this earlier, it feels fantastic. And it doesn't matter what sort of come around it. As such, when you're in this particular house or even just standing in the grounds, you could be anywhere in the world. It just,
It's got character.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's got charm, and it's a good place.
100%. So from your point of view, did you ever think you'd end up owning the back block of Casa Nova?
No way.
How on earth did that come about?
Because that was my mother and my late husband,
Yeah.
Cooking it up between them.
Because your mother loved this property.
She did, she wanted to add to it. And
Yeah.
at that time, my brother Stuart lived over the other side of Old Street.
Across the road, actually,
across the
ironically
road.
enough.
Yeah, so there was a bit of a sort of a family thing, and so the land behind came on the market, and my mother talked my husband into buying it.
And which came with the house which you're residing in now.
Well, no, that didn't. The house, that house was built in Oamaru and taken up to Twizel. Mm-hmm. It's called a Twizel house, and people in Oamaru know what that means. Yeah. It's a house in Twizel or from Twizel. And in the 80s, my husband and I were broke, young couple with not much money, and we tendered for this Twizel house, and it came back down from Twizel and was put where it is today. And we were originally going to build a house up the hill with a grand sweeping view, but our life took a different path. We went way overseas and worked overseas for many years. Came back.
But you still got you had the land at that time associated
we always
with the
had
house.
that land, and we had all sorts of tenants of varying degrees of care and responsibility, as everybody.
Yes, I'm sure as everyone knows.
Some of them were great, some of them were not so great, but it's just the story of the property. But I lost my husband to cancer, and I decided to come back and live in Oamaru because this is where my family was. And I already had a little house to live in, and it
was all here.
It was all here. It's perfect size house for one.
In fact, lucky for Oamaru that you did, to be fair, because Heather, just so our listeners knows, donates her time everywhere. Yeah. I could walk into Forrester's Art Gallery. Heather will be behind the counter.
Yeah, the Forrester Gallery.
If I pop my head into the Scottish Hall, Heather will pop up there like Where's Wally? She is everywhere and is fantastic at donating her time. I did mention earlier too that this is a town that has a real high feeling of community involvement for the people that live in it. And they really do take it seriously. They care. Yeah. And it's so nice to be a part of that community that thinks in that way, because unfortunately that is a little bit of a dying breed. It doesn't feel like that in Auckland anymore. No. That's one of the reasons we moved down here.
For more community. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just big enough so that you might see someone in the supermarket, and you have that feeling of connection. Yeah, but you can also get away from people if you need to.
100%. Yeah, I think there's a really good balance here, and I think that maybe that's the difference between coming from a work-life culture that I came from that was 99.9% work orientated, and maybe not so much balance and life balance.
No, we have serious fun in Oamaru.
Yeah, we do. And look, in some ways I probably work harder than I've ever worked in my life with taking on the various endeavours that I do. But in saying that, I feel more fulfilled than probably I ever have. And I think that's the big difference when it's something that you're doing and you're building for yourself. So much like your parents, I feel like we've created and we've been building this legacy because we are only but the caretaker of a property like this. Yeah. I think it's foolish to think it's ever really yours.
Well, you're going to go one day and the house will still be here.
Well, I damn well hope so after the amount of refurbishments and everything that's been put into it.
You've got it ready for the next 150 years.
Oh, gosh.
You really do.
But one thing that I did want to talk about is I understand the original toilet that was in Casa Nova House is sitting over in a museum in Naseby.
We need to get that back.
Yes, we do. Tell me about that.
Okay, well, that is part of our Central Otago connection. So my granddad, Graham, was a curator of the Naseby Museum. It was a volunteer's. He wasn't an actual museum curator by trade. He just did it as part of his community service. And my mother donated this willow pattern toilet bowl that was from Casa Nova to the museum over there, where it is still there and you can see it. I just think it's time we brought it back. I've actually just been talking with my sister Shona about this recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we're going to, I think, apply to the museum to get it back. I don't know whether they'll let us have it. Or whether they insist it goes to a museum in Oamaru.
Well, at least they know it's safe.
Well, but it is safe.
It would be great for it to be.
It's amazing it wasn't wrecked, to be honest, with all the vandalism that went on around here. The big stained glass window at the halfway up the stairs. That was a beautiful, beautiful stained glass window with many different little panels, diamond-shaped panels of different glass. It was just exquisite, and it just lit up the whole staircase. And my parents bought the house, and shortly after that, that was vandalised.
Oh, no.
It really, really upset us all. And so they put in what they've got now, which is, wasn't anywhere near as glorious as the original.
No, but I do understand that they got the centrepiece, the centre plane, which has the lilies and the urn, out of the old Oamaru mortuary. Yeah. That it was recycled. So, look, I think it all forms part of the tapestry.
Mum was a great scavenger of stuff. very enterprising. She was very bold. She'd ask for something. She said, "You just go into the bank and ask the manager for how much money you want. Never be afraid of asking."
Unfortunately,
for what
I
you
think
need.
those days might have slightly gone, as my bank manager will attest. But
Yeah.
but it was a time when where people had a lot more hope, I think, and more faith in each other.
Mum still got a bit of, both my parents got a bit of flack about doing up. What do you want to do that old rec
Really?
up for? But once it opened up as a business, it was very successful and good. And as you are aware, we had a bit of opposition from some neighbours about the general rowdiness. And believe me,
You did. I didn't actually realise that. I knew 20-something years ago the Taylors had a hell of a time with their resource consent.
We have, and to be honest, your guests are way quieter and salubrious than our guests ever were. Remember, we had all the sort of Yahoo 21st and the little weddings, but it's we never had any serious trouble. I mean, people.
I think over time things have been made to be so low key it's not even funny. I mean, when your parents had it, there would have been 100, 200 people here.
It was packed,
and it should be in a house of this size.
Yeah, and the cars parked all over the place, and people revving up and tearing away at home at midnight. I mean, Dad was very particular about our time constraints.
Yeah,
we shut it down. And we did. We just got, and that's you have to develop skills to sort of escort your guests out without making them feel upset.
Well, our actual plasterer, Trevor Jobson, actually said to me that he attended his first ball here when he was 16.
Yeah, a lot of people.
So I think for a lot of people it did create sort of those ongoing memories of weddings and, very fond memories.
Yes.
Like the people that have mentioned to me and spoken about it have only but the fondest of memories. But it does actually kind of lead me into something that I'm going to talk about in this episode. My last episode, I did a heritage piece with Sarah Gallagher. But just prior to that, we were up in our renovation story towards the end of 2020, whereby we just had a snag with our liquor licence and had just found out that it had been objected to.
Yes.
Which we did not see coming.
No, that blindsided everybody,
Oh,
didn't it?
my gosh, we did not see that coming in a million years. And I think that, that people have been listening to the podcast journey now understand that it was not an easy journey for us, not emotionally, and certainly not financially. So when we hit that snag, which was unexpected because it had been a licensed premises, and we're not just talking, for 50, 60 years, there'd been forms of entertainment carried out in this property. It was a hospitality venue and a residence above. That was nothing new. It was resource consented as a restaurant. So we never foresaw that coming. But I do want to acknowledge that you were one of our neighbours that did support us and actually have the most probably to lose because you're the nearest to us.
Exactly.
I think these days your biggest complaint might be our little yapping dog, Louie, the poor little thing. Louie drives poor Heather nuts. Coco's a dream, so that's lucky. But I did want to, because it did really blindside, I think, all of us.
I remember the phone call. You told me about it. You were gobsmacked.
Oh, I was gobsmacked.
I was gobsmacked. It was unhelpful and unnecessary.
But many a tear was shed over that because we thought finally the finish line for us was in sight. And then to find out that it wasn't.
And it was a huge thing. I mean, honestly, we went to council. We sat there
100%. The thing is, though, it's a bit like a pub with no beer. No one's going to attend that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it felt like for us. But look, Heather, I want to thank you greatly for coming along and joining us today. I think that your insight into the fact of what your parents did, and thank God they did that, because had they not, Casa Nova would not exist today. It would have been demolished. Yep. And instead what they did is they saved really this legacy piece of history that's now a Category 1 listed property. And that means it's of significance to New Zealand, not just Oamaru.
Exactly.
So you and your family should take great comfort in the fact that they actually saved that for future generations to enjoy of New Zealanders.
We do. We're very proud of it. And we're also, we're proud of all the people that have cared for Casa Nova, and especially you and Brenda,
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Especially.
Thank you so much, Heather, for joining us. Take care.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We're still towards the end of 2020. We've applied for our liquor licence in the September of 2020. That was the only thing that was really outstanding at this point for us to be able to open the restaurant. The restaurant was sitting there, the tables, the chairs, all the commercial kitchen equipment had gone in. all the appropriate licenses sought for, the food control plan and everything like that. We'd worked out a menu where we were going to specialise on what we do best, which was Mediterranean tapas. So by no means were we sort of glib in this. We never foresaw that getting a liquor licence would be the issue. Casa Nova House has already been a licensed premises. We combined, Brenda and I have over 45 years of hospitality experience. Also, we were licence holders in our restaurant in Auckland and had been for some years. There were no complaints located against that restaurant or our company for the way that we conducted ourselves and our business. So we really just didn't see it as an issue. We had many a conversation with our local liquor licensing inspector. And what we decided at the time, because I do like to be very detailed, and I think this is probably where it bit me, was that we applied, and she suggested that we actually apply for an off license and an on license, and that what it would end up being is combined would give us sort of like a hotel license. Because we had our guest rooms upstairs and we'd always intended to put a minibar in there, my plan was that we legally be able to sell alcohol. Ironically, we probably didn't need to because we were under the capacity of 10 people. Me being me, I thought it would be the right thing to do to actually just get everything legally compliant. We also had in Auckland, we had a business at the time called the Grazing Box, where we put together gourmet cheese hampers. So my thought was, coming out of COVID as well, it could be another revenue stream for us that we could put together some gourmet cheese boxes that could include a bottle of wine. So the off license would cover our in-house guests, the potential development of the grazing box, and it was even thought at the time, because it was such a small restaurant, that if a customer, we didn't want them to have to force down a bottle of wine, they could actually just, put the cap on and the rest could be consumed at home. So at no time did we sort of think that this was going to be an issue. Well, obviously it turned out to be an issue, a very, very costly issue for us. As I was saying, we had everything sitting here waiting to go. The application went in the September. The advertisements begun where the community has an opportunity to put their response in and any concerns that they may have. Now, we'd never received any objections before for our other licensed venue or renewals of those applications. So to receive 3 objections, it caught us completely off guard. And we thought to begin with that maybe it was just a misunderstanding. It turns out that 3 of the objections received, 2 of them were neighbours that had a boundary that bordered onto us, ironically to the furthest away. The other one, the third one, was located across the road from us. And it was very clearly evident from the tone and the way that these objections were written that all 3 were in discussion with each other as to what their objections were. As I said, we were completely caught off guard. We didn't see it coming. 2 of the neighbours we had actually spoken to and were aware what our plans were. One of them actually used to work for the previous 2 owners. We didn't seek that employment. We couldn't actually afford to continue that employment, so that never happened with us. But that particular neighbour had also signed their agreement to a resource consent some 20-odd years earlier for Casa Nova House to be a restaurant. So we were genuinely very surprised and very shocked that this had happened. When we finally did see what the objections were, we were even more shocked. There was, issues of potentially a driveway, someone's driveway being blocked, that people could be drunken and disorderly, potentially entering onto other people's properties, that we wouldn't adhere to our existing resource consent. From our point of view, we just couldn't believe it. We had spent all this time, all this money. We really financially needed to open this restaurant by the Christmas and try to capitalise on any potential sort of Christmas parties, any type of bookings we could get. And it's important to note that Casa Nova House has actually been some type of hospitality venue for well over 60, 70 years. So this was here long before the neighbours' homes were even built. So from our point of view, it could actually be argued that they had bought next to or near a property that was already trading as a hospitality venue. It certainly already had a resource consent for it to be a restaurant. To receive any type of objection there, really unwarranted. I could understand that people might have had concerns if there was about noise and things like that, But at no time did any of these three neighbours come across the fence and approach us and say, hey, we've seen your advertisement. We're a bit concerned. We're concerned about the times you're applying for. And that was the other thing. We just applied for blanket times. I mean, as you do, you just go for the maximum that you can go to. We are very aware that we can only trade to our resource consent. So I think some people confuse liquor licensing hours, with trading hours. They are two very different beasts. We wanted the ability also, so we had the off license because we had the minibar, we're looking at the cheese box. We wanted a regular restaurant on license, and we also wanted to be able to do dining in our grounds. Casa Nova House sits on an acre. This is not a property that's like jammed up next to its neighbours where they have 2 metre boundaries. We're talking, 30, 40, 50 metres away from the objectors. We sort of go through this process. We talk to the liquor licensing inspector. We're trying to figure out what on earth we can do. Our concern was obviously we're applying for this license. We need to get the license through. We can't open a restaurant without the ability to sell alcohol. It makes up a large portion of your income. Not only that, most people don't want to go to a dry restaurant. Unfortunately, they just don't. We sort of tried to progress everything that we could, but we were also caught off guard, and this was our first time that this had ever happened. So it was a learning curve for us, pretty hard to differentiate between the business and it being a sort of a semi-personal attack. And that's kind of how it felt, because we had met with two of these people previously. They knew what we were doing. And then when we read the objections, they didn't correlate to what our plan was for the site. We were never going to be this raucous venue. We spent over $500,000 renovating it. It's like there was an inference in there that it was going to be, a place where people would come and drink after the local rugby clubs had closed up for the night. First of all, if you'd seen any of our Facebook posts, that was never going to happen. We weren't spending this sort of money to do up a venue like this to allow unchecked drunken and disorderly behaviour. But, everyone has their right to their comment. Where I think this process really fell over for us and became very time-consuming and very costly is that we had agreed to meet the objectors at the local council so that hopefully we could reach some type of agreement so that we could keep progressing it forward. It's important to note too that there were no objections for our application from the Oamaru Police. The Department of Health did not object. The Waitaki District Council did not object. Liquor Licensing Inspector did not object. Our whole process got held up by three people that I believe had an agenda. That's my personal opinion, and I'm allowed to have it. It was a very costly thing for us. And it's interesting to note that in the end, of course, we did get our license and we were able to trade. We have not received one complaint against our license since we have opened. We're a very low-key operation. Our resource consent was very restrictive by today's standards. You were only allowed to trade certain days of the week for certain times. You could actually only have up to 50 people for a function, 30 people dining at any one time. So there was a lot of constraints around a venue that at one point in time in the 60s would have held hundreds of people. The previous two owners who went ahead with the restaurant and the resource consent, they had a hell of a time getting that through, and it was very costly for them. They ended up going to court. So for us, we just didn't see this one as being an issue because it was already consented to be a restaurant. That was one of the reasons that we purchased the building in the first place. Going through this process, we actually meet the objectors at council on the 18th of November. I felt that it was interesting. Of course, we're going to be a bit on defensive because whether you want to see it or not, what we are doing is being attacked. Someone is objecting to what you're trying to achieve. We tried to be very calm and very professional about everything. The big bone of contention seemed to be around the hours and how that would relate. I think something got really lost in translation, though, to do with the off license. That was really primarily put in place for our in-house guests. As I said, we didn't even need to actually apply for that, but I wanted to be able to cover that grazing box, for it to be able to cover two things. At this stage, we are really concerned about income, where it's going to come from, and trying to make this site viable. We've just gone through this real year of uncertainty with COVID. Our business in Auckland was being opened up and closed down like a yo-yo to do with the traffic light system. So we did not want to limit our ability to be able to generate income. We always intended, though, for it to be done in a safe and practical way. And we, at the end of the day, this is where we reside. We didn't want to have upset neighbours. Ironically, one of them no longer lives there. But we didn't want to have that situation. We wanted to, I wanted to be able to drive in the driveway and think we can wave at each other and have a chat over the fence and, things be delightful. Ironically, it didn't turn out that way. So we had our meeting at council. We then went away from that meeting they had put forward a proposal of what they wanted to see. I was still probably really caught up in the fact of I didn't understand how 3 people that had no financial say in what we were up to could have such a strong opinion and dictate to us how we could operate our business. That still astounds me that can happen in this day and age. If you have legitimate, reasonable grounds for objection, I understand that there's a process and that you want to be able to talk about that and hopefully put to bed people's concerns. One of our original objections received, they actually sent a letter to council, and in the body text of the letter said, "We object to the licence," but put no reason or grounds for the actual objection. They actually said in there, "Please email me if you'd like to know further as to what my objections are." So I looked at that and I'm thinking, how does this even get off the ground? So yeah, it's still a bone of contention for me because it really did cost us 6 months of income. And that at the time was really quite critical. So we have the meeting. I think, it's not that it didn't go well, but I think they were not really going to budge too much on their points. I was trying to budge a bit on the hours and come down a little bit. There was a bit of probably miscommunication about the hours. I definitely took one thing. They seem to have gone away with another. In the end, it was left that we needed to respond to their suggestion. So we responded on the 2nd of December, and we found out that actually they had already notified the Liquor Licensing Division on the 1st of December that they wished for this matter to go to hearing. So really, we didn't stand a chance. This right from the get-go, this was all about disruption and to make sure that we couldn't proceed with getting a liquor licence. We then find out that we have to go to hearing. This is really, really daunting. It's very easy for someone to sit at home in their armchair and send off an email to lay a complaint, but they don't really have to do any follow-through with it. The onus then becomes on us to actually have to prove our point. At this point in time, we're going to an actual formal hearing. So we're seeking legal advice. We're advised that we should have legal representation. And the reality is that we actually couldn't afford it at that point. So this became a real, for us, it kind of felt life or death. There was potentially the whole reason we'd bought this building was for it to be a restaurant, and potentially we couldn't be a restaurant. So we just sunk in all this money, and here we were in this situation of being forced into a hearing. Even today, it's a real bone of contention for me, and it still is for Brenda, because I think if you're going to be disruptive to someone's business, it needs to have merit, and I really don't feel by the time we got to this point that it did. And certainly there was no ongoing objections into the future with how we conduct ourselves. To prepare for the hearing, now that is a really interesting part, and it's very scary and it's very daunting. I actually approached our liquor licensing inspector in Auckland, who actually gave us the equivalent of an affidavit to submit for this hearing to say that we were trustworthy licensees, that we'd never had a complaint against us or our business in Auckland, and that we conducted ourselves in an appropriate manner. The restaurant in Auckland was exactly what we were trying to duplicate at Casa Nova House, which was the tapa-style dining. The other thing that it's important to note too, that as I was developing the wine list at this stage, I spent a month researching our wine list to make sure that everything was of such a good quality, that we used local product and that we had artisan products. So this wasn't some type of bottle shop pub situation in any way, shape or form. As a part of this as well, one of the objectors had made the comment that us being able to go ahead and serve alcohol would effectively devalue their property. So this should go to show you how at this point it's kind of like, okay. So I then approached a registered valuer in Oamaru and had them write a letter because they couldn't believe it either. They were gobsmacked that someone would think that. If you were thinking, what would add more value to your property? Something that's sitting next to you that's derelict, that's run down, and that has sheep running through it, or something that's an operating viable business and has had a lot of money spent on it and is now, thanks to us, a significant landmark. That was really tough, but these were all things that were time consuming and that we had to get. So very luckily for us, we did have a local valuer who put that in writing. And also, there were things that they were complaining about traffic management out on public roads. Well, look, no one has control over who parks their vehicle on a public road. We also actually have our own private car park. So there was things that, to this day, I still shake my head and think, how did it get this far? But at any rate, we go to hearing on the 18th of December. I put forward, I think, a very strong submission with appendices, which I could back up my position with written fact, which I think is also, very important. From a business point of view, I was very clear on putting everything in writing, and especially there's a very long email train, which I was able to actually go back through to research for this podcast. So this is not coming off memory, as it's also coming off fact from our email exchanges between liquor licensing and back and forth to us. During this time, actually I feel sorry for them because it was probably 100 emails that were going back and forth, because I was very clear. I realised that when there was this problem, I needed to make sure that I captured everything in writing. It's very easy for people sometimes to misconstrue your spoken word and the inference is not there, or they take things in the wrong way. I wanted to be very clear on what our position was, what we were seeking, why we were seeking it, and how we were eventually going to achieve it. I felt we put forward a very good submission and proposal to the local district licensing committee. And it was scary. It's a very formal setting. You are sworn in. You are under oath. And if things don't go well at this for us, the next step up would mean that we literally are going before a judge. Now, if that gets to that point, then we have got solicitors involved and we are talking at a really, really costly level. So even at this, I represented our interests at the hearing, but it was scary. When you've not done anything like that before, you don't quite know what to expect. But all you can do, I think, is try to be concise and as practical as possible. I think sometimes it's really hard. You've got to try and it's hard to do this. We're all human, but to try and keep the emotion out of it. The fact was for us that we believed that we could respond to each objection and that we could do it in such a way that it was backed up with fact. You think your house value is going to devalue? Well, here's a letter from a registered valuer to say that it won't. You think that there's an issue with parking on a public road? Well, here's a letter from council that says anyone can park on a public road. So you try to combat these things. The other issue was too, and with neighbours on your boundary, they don't want you to be necessarily very late at night and so forth. The irony of this entire situation is that we're more capped than they are. So they could have 300 people in their backyard. They could have a live band. They could go through till 3 or 4 in the morning. Sure, I could make a complaint to noise control, but they legally could do that. I can't. So when you put that into kind of perspective, your next door neighbour could actually do all the things that they're saying that you potentially could do, but you can't. So, it just is the most asinine thing in the universe. One thing that we were promised by the chair at the time of the DLC, that they would make their decision, well, at that stage it should have been before Christmas. It was very clear to everyone that we really did need a decision so that we could progress forward. We'd now missed the Christmas party season. We made our thoughts really clear on where we needed to be as far as financially, that we were very dependent on this. After the hearing had completed, they did ask the District Licensing Committee if they could do a site inspection, and we agreed to that. Of course, that took place on the 22nd of December. The reason being that I think it's hard for people to comprehend the distances between buildings. The two people that boarded us that objected were the furthest away. We also had 3 neighbours at the hearing represented that were in support of our application. And those 3 neighbours were the closest to us and the most affected by whatever activity we undertook, because boundary-wise, they were the closest to the southern end of the building. It's terrible to think that, you had this problem on one side. We also had very supportive neighbours on the other. Thank goodness. And they had been there long enough to also remember when there was the issues some 20 years earlier with the resource consent. So they were able to put a lot of perspective on things for us. And it gave me some hope, that all was not lost, that we had the support of the people that were the nearest to us. So we did the site inspection, and it is still considered a part of the hearing. So you can't sort of talk off track or anything like that. As the owners and the applicant, we were just basically there should they have a question of us. It was still conducted in a very formal way. They wanted to see the lower lawn, the side lawn where we proposed to have our outside dining. They also saw the calibre of the upstairs renovations as far as the guest luxury bed and breakfast. They saw the downstairs restaurant, the dining room, the commercial kitchen. So they went through all of these spaces, and then it was left that they would go away, they would deliberate, obviously, and then I think and then write the report, and the report would consider the outcome of our application. Around this time, though, as the committee is deliberating over Christmas, we soon realise we're not going to get their deliberation before Christmas. My mum and her partner had come down visiting from Auckland to see us for Christmas. So, we were trying to be really optimistic about what we were heading into. Mum and Brenda and actually gone out op shopping, of all things, and I happened to be stuffing the turkey in the commercial kitchen downstairs, and I had the door open, and when you look through the door, there's a screen door, and you can sort of see past a fountain into the most beautiful apricot tree that was well known around Oamaru for having the most amazing apricots. And it was speculated that this tree was planted at the age of the house. So at that stage, it was pretty much 159, 60 years old. So I happened to be there and I was stuffing the turkey. I'm on the phone to the restaurant manager in Auckland because we're wrapping up for Christmas, and the staff, the restaurant up there would close for 2 weeks and the staff would go on their holidays. So we were going through those last minute things that you need to finalise. And then I hear this almighty crack, and I glance up at the time to watch this tree absolutely fall over, and the noise was horrific. I said to the manager, look, I've got to go. You're not going to believe this. The tree's just fallen over. At this point, I'm thinking, oh my God, what else could actually happen to us? We can't get the liquor license. We've found problem after problem as we're renovating, and now the tree's fallen over, on us. So it was kind of never-ending as to what was being thrown at us. To be brutally honest, I was quite happy to see the back of 2020 for many different reasons. To see Casa Nova House, go to our website, www.casanovahouse.co.nz, or check us out on Facebook or Instagram. You've been listening to the Last Resort podcast with Katrina McLaren.